minutes just to come online. Okay.
Okay, hang on.
I'm waiting for your live.
We're live now. We should be live if we just give it a couple of seconds.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay.
We just need to check we've got captions. Okay, we're live.
Fabulous. Okay, hello and welcome everybody. I'll be chairing this evening's book launch on War on Disabled People. So I am Stephanie and I'm a disabled Black student activist involved with Stand Up to Racism, Extinction Rebellion, and at my university's Socialist Worker Student Society. Some of you may have noticed I'm not Mandy. Unfortunately, she's not feeling very well, so we'll wish her all of the best from her friends and comrades. Welcome, everyone. We're streaming over Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Welcome to Deepak's international friends. We have disabled activists from Greece, the United States, and even Uganda watching. Okay, so we are here to launch a new book, which is The War on Disabled People, Capitalism, Welfare, and the Making of a Human Catastrophe, published by Z Books and available to order from the 15th of June, which is today. It is written by a disabled activist about the past 10 years specifically, but within the context and history of disabled people's oppression. On the Z website, you can also find both a summary with pictures and BSL translation of the key points and arguments that the book makes. Sadly, Z are unable to provide an audiobook, and people please feel free to let Z know if that is a problem for them, in the hopes that it won't be in the future. The event is also a chance for activists and our allies to come together in what has been a particularly tough time for disabled people. We've had so much thrown at us through austerity, and the impacts of cuts in welfare reform are still being felt deeper and deeper each day. Possibility of a Corbyn-led government gave many hope, but so the 2020 general election defeat and prospect not only of another 5 years of Tory rule, but of the most right-wing government in modern British history has led to feelings of absolute despair among so many disabled people. And then we had COVID-19, which exposed many existing inequalities in society even more starkly than before. But even so, disabled campaigners don't give up. We carry on fighting because we know we have no other chance. We know that change will never be given to us. Meaningful change only happens from below. In the second half of the meeting, we are going to focus a bit more on where we go from here. So this event will kick off a series of weekly meetings, which will be hosted on Zoom and give more time for discussion and to hear more voices. We also want the event tonight to be fun, to help us remember how strong we are together and celebrate our achievements. We'll be having some music in the break, scheduled from John Kelly. And when we come back, John McDonnell will reveal the winning names for the prize draw for a free copy of the book, which has been kindly donated by Z Books. If you want to use any hashtags during this event, you can use hashtag #EveryDeathCounts and hashtag WarOnDisPPL. Please do like and share and introduce yourselves in the comment section, send in your thoughts and comments. You will have until the break to send in questions for the question and answer with Ellen, and that access break is actually at 7:30. So you will have until about 7:50 to send in your questions. Okay, so please send in your questions about how we go forward from here and how we build a stronger resistance challenging all forms of oppression. Any questions and comments we don't have time to read out today will be included in notes that will be written up and available on the DPAC website. Okay, so I would like to hand over. We are running below time, over time, but we'll have about 5 minutes here. We'll have a remembrance poem by Rob Puntin, written about COVID-19, but also poignant given the number of great activists and friends we have lost over the past 10 years. Recently, DPAC's own Sean McGovern, who did so much to bring together the trade union and disabled people's movements.
Thank you for inviting me today. I'm going to, if you bear with me, I've got to get my poem up and then we'll get things started. Yes, as Sophie said, I'm a poet as well as an activist, and I wrote this poem during the pandemic, and the poem's called Remembrance. As this pandemic plays out, lights go out all over the world. The light of our living souls, Christian, Muslim, Sikh, Jew, religion matters not. Creed or colour is no defence, no protection. Ability or disability is no shield. To this horror we can all yield. COVID-19 hits us all. Care and compassion is what we can all wield as we take to the field in defence. So once this lockdown is picked, we are once more set free. Look up to the night skies where stars are born to mark the passing of souls. Give praise to those we have lost. Be assured to those who care, those who matter. Your lives mattered. We will honor you. We will remember you. Thank you. That's the end of the poem.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much, Rob. And we'll now hear from Liz Carr, who is a veteran disabled campaigner.
Go.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry, Liz Carr is a veteran disabled campaigner.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Thank you. I'm going to be looking a bit to the left. It's all weird with this Zoom stuff. Ellen is a very difficult person to say no to, as many people that have worked with her and campaigned with her will know. And of course, that's part of her charm. That's how we get them on the front line. So when she asked me in May, she said, so, Liz, I was wondering, and no pressure to say yes, but if you might be able to say a few words at my online book launch on Zoom, because it was you that taught me the social model and disability. And as it says in the acknowledgements, it's therefore my fault. Well, I don't think I've ever been so chuffed to be blamed for something, because if I was the switch that turned on Ellen Clifford's light bulb moment, what an honour. So she said what happened is, this would be the 90s as well, that's how old I feel, is that she was a PA at Coventry University, and I was training PAs in the social model. And there I was with my flip chart, probably inaccessible, and there she was in the room, and I started to talk about the social model. I think that's crucial. So many of us have had that moment. And, you know, that when we've all been told that shit about disability, that it's the tragic consequence of our messed up bodies, it's all our fault. All that exclusion, all the oppression, all the disablism, it's our fault. Our fault as individuals. And then someone tells you that it's the barriers in society, it's the structural discrimination and oppression. It changes everything. It brings us together as disabled people, it unites us, and it frees us. I was there when it happened for Ellen, and I'm really proud of that. As she says to talk again about the social model, the book underpinned, as Ellen says, the book follows the social model of disability, a tool developed by disabled people as a guide for social action. It draws a distinction between impairment and disability. Disability consists of the barriers that a person with impairment experiences as a result of the way in which society is organised, and that excludes or devalues them. According to this analysis, preferred terminology in Britain is to describe people as disabled, because we're disabled by society. We're not people with disabilities, which makes no sense from a social model perspective. All I was the switch. Ellen was the bulb, and she burns so brightly. And particularly, that's so important in these dark days, these really difficult times, is that she is a light. And a light to bring us this book, and what a talent in bringing us this book, as we're fighting at the moment for pretty much as ever for our very existence. And that electricity is fueled by you, is fueled by allies and activists and disabled people, and every campaign and every fight and every protest and every experience of oppression and discrimination. That just makes you more powerful, more political, and more empowered. So that's the electricity that helps, I think, Ellen Bryan shine so brightly. So I turned that on for her. She's turned that on, and turned on probably, I'm not even going to go there, for so many, many people, that it's extraordinary. So when she said to me, would I speak tonight? And I'm about to finish, by the way, so I do like the sound of my own voice. She said, would you speak? This was my response, and I apologise for my language. I'd be fucking honoured, my friend, truly, because I couldn't be prouder of you and all the work that you do and the humanity that you show and that you share with the world. So congratulations, Ellen, on this masterpiece of a book, and have a wonderful evening, everybody. We're in for a treat, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. And I would like to introduce Linda Burnett, co-founder of DPAC, and without whom none of us would be here tonight. So without further ado, Linda.
Hello. Hi. Ellen asked me to talk a bit about the history of DPAC. So basically, it grew out of a disabled people's section of a march against the Tory party conference in Birmingham in 2010. And that was because it was obvious from the June 2010 budget that disabled people's rights were going to be stripped away from them by the Tories' austerity policies. It poured down with rain the whole day. We were all soaked, but it was an amazing experience. And that basically led to DPAC being established. We were told at the time by many people that we were being alarmist and that we were overreacting and that things wouldn't be so bad. They couldn't possibly be so bad. But unfortunately, that has not been the case. And in the last 10 years, even before coronavirus appeared on the scene, many, many thousands of disabled people have died unnecessarily, or, depending on your view, been murdered as a result of Tory policies. At the time of the march, there was no real alternative or viable organisation campaigning for the rights of disabled people. And so DPAC was launched basically to fill that void. We wanted to make sure that disabled people weren't forgotten. We wanted to make them visible again, and we wanted to make sure that their voices were heard. I think we've done a really good job in the last 10 years in doing that, and we've continued to grow in strength and importance, and we are very much a national voice for disabled people's rights, for their justice and for their equality. Some people recently seem to be confused about exactly what DPAC is. So we're not a charity, we are a campaign group. We're not a charity because we aren't going to allow ourselves to be restricted in the activities we undertake or the things that we want to do to make our voices heard. We have no formal funding for the same reason that we want to be totally independent and we don't want to be restricted in any way. And we want to be in a position where we never are forced to compromise. So everyone who contributes to DPAC, and there are many, many people who do so on a voluntary basis. DPAC has always been organised horizontally. We don't have any leaders, we don't have a chairperson, and we definitely don't have well-paid CEO. But throughout the country, literally from Cornwall right up to Scotland, large numbers of people contribute to DPAC in a variety of ways, and they're all committed to advancing our movement's cause. We have a steering group who coordinate our day-to-day activities and overall strategies. We always knew and we always said that DPAC was not going to be for every disabled person. That's because we think some people view us, well, we know some people view us as controversial and extreme even. But we're quite happy with things as they are, and obviously we do take on board criticisms. However, there are times when the level of personal abuse, particularly to steering group members, can be quite vitriolic and very divisive. Strangely, it's how I always imagine it must have been for Jeremy Corbyn with Tom Watson as his deputy. But again, in the same way, I'm sure we all are very careful about who we turn our backs on. Fortunately, on the whole, we have very, very good allies, very good supporters, and we get a lot of positive feedback from the support that we give to people on an individual basis. And that makes our mission very worthwhile. Over the last 10 years, in terms of changing policy, we've had successes and failures, but we're still here and we're still fighting. And until disabled people have achieved equality and rights, we will keep demanding those. We basically don't have any choice. We've all tragically witnessed how coronavirus has affected people, disabled people of all ages, in care homes and nursing home settings. And basically, they were left, people in care homes were basically left to die. Nobody bothered about them. People were sent home from hospital with the disease. And, well, it's just been horrendous. But we can't accept the deaths of so many of our people. And segregation into care homes like this and into adult treatment units, where so many disabled people are incarcerated for years and years, is not acceptable. Equally unacceptable is the imprisonment of disabled people in their homes due to lack of adequate support for independent living. And we will keep campaigning very vigorously for social care and support for independent living to be free at the point of delivery. Disabled people still lack an adequate income, and in many cases, especially since personal independence payments, attendance allowance and disability living allowance is now snatched away from people by local authorities to pay towards their care funding, people are being left with totally ridiculously low amounts of money on which they're supposed to exist. That is something else that really needs to change. Yeah, and the only other thing I would like to say is that Ellen's wonderful book outlining the war on disabled people and our resilience in fighting back is a fitting memorial to our co-founder Debbie Jolly and to the many other disabled activists who have died in the last 10 years. While we are still excluded from so many aspects of life that non-disabled people take for granted, our battles for full inclusion in society must continue.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you. Sorry, I had to cut you off a bit there.
It's okay, I'd finished more or less.
Thank you. So our next speaker will be Ross Wynne Jones, a journalist who has done a lot, she has done a lot to expose the horrors of welfare reform under the coalition government. And beyond that, has been an amazing ally to disabled people. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for having me here today. I'm just incredibly proud to speak at the launch of Ellen's book and just to be in the presence of so many campaigners who I admire, just looking at the list even of speakers, let alone the people that are listening, so thank you. I feel like we've always met in dangerous and difficult times, and maybe these dangerous and difficult times don't feel that different. But we know, of course, that the coronavirus is already impacting disproportionately disabled people and gives even more urgency to this project, really. I first met Ellen in the summer of 2013. I just started writing the Real Britain column in the Daily Mirror in a response to a dazzling onslaught of new legislation that was beginning to affect our readers in a myriad of ways. We were just getting hundreds of letters from people saying, I don't understand, this has happened, my benefit stopped, this is support that I've had for years is going. So we started the column as a way of kind of responding to that. And began to see that this was the moment that the government had decided that disabled people were going to pay the price of austerity. They were the ones who had done the least to cause the financial crisis, but were going to pay for it, basically. It was the start of the war on disabled people and what the UN has called the human catastrophe for disabled people, as people will all know. We were seeing the bedroom tax, the brutal adjustments to the work capability assessment, cuts to personal dependence payments, the benefit cap, and of course, alongside that, the enabling narrative. So basically this war on apparent scroungers that enabled austerity. And it just became a moment when it seemed that hearing the voices of actual real disabled people could not have been more important, really, in the history of journalism. So Ellen and I and Deepak worked together on all sorts of different stories, including the fight to save the LifeWorks clinic in Cambridge, and especially the campaign to stop the destruction of the Independent Living Fund. We worked on a number of videos kind of profiling different people, telling people's absolutely horrific stories, ILF users who really needed that support. And one memorable day that I think Ellen will remember was when we walked with Deepak campaigners from Parliament all the way to Ian Duncan Smith's constituency office in Chingford, which was a distance of about 13 miles with a lot of ILF people that received that Independent Living Fund. And while a lot of campaigners in power chairs were able to recharge their batteries kind of every few miles, Ellen and I basically just had to rely on crisps to keep going during the 13-mile walk. And when we got there, funnily enough, so Ian didn't manage to come out and talk to us, even though we'd walked 13 miles with lots of people in wheelchairs to come and talk to him. So I think there are so many important things about this book, and the most important is that Ellen's written it. I think in the last 7 years or so, I've been just in constant admiration for the way that people in DPAC have managed to keep a fight back against just an absolute constant onslaught by the government against disabled people. It's not a theoretical onslaught, but affects disabled people very personally. And as we know, many people have paid with their lives. To write a book just on top of just existing as a working class woman with an impairment in the current climate just takes extraordinary strength. And in her book, Ellen talks about how it feels like punching through walls, just trying to get the words out there. But somehow she has found that strength to punch through. And for me, I think history is too often written by the wrong people. And for once, Ellen is entirely the right person to have written this book. And this book isn't just a history, it's also a manual for a fight back that only gets more urgent with every more right-wing government that has got into number 10. I think it's been hard for us all not to feel demoralised since 2019. The Cummings-Johnson government makes the Cameron Clegg years look like Hugo Chavez was in Downing Street, and Ian Duncan Smith, the perpetrator of all these atrocities that Ellen describes, has been knighted. The Tories, as Ellen says, have been rewarded for their cruelty, not by their removal, but by an increased majority. So it's hard to keep going, but that's all the more reason why this book is so important, because we have to come back not just stronger, but more thoughtful and wiser. And I think this book helps us build our strongest possible case. So thank you for Ellen for writing it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roz. I would like to introduce the next speaker, Debbie Abrahams, MP for Oldham East and Saddleworth, and a consistent champion of disabled people's rights. She also won last year's People's MP of the Year award. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Steph, and it's a real pleasure to follow on from Roz, who again, another indomitable campaigner there on behalf of disabled people. But can I start really by sending a huge congratulations to Ellen. Such an important book, such a timely book as well. So if you haven't had the chance to get one, please do get one, or go to your library and ask them to order some copies, because we're all here because, not just because you love Ellen, but because she always has something important to say. So as I say, massive congratulations to you. It's not an easy job writing a book, I know, to my cost. I just want to reflect a little bit in terms of some of the things that people have already said, and reiterate some of the key points. But I met Ellen about 5 years ago when I was appointed as Shadow Minister for Disabled People, and it was at that time that that DPAC and other DPOs in a coalition across all DPOs, I think that's such an important point, was trying to get the UN inquiry into breaches of the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and the breadth and the scale. I had been aware, because I've been on the Work and Pension Select Committee, of quite a bit of it, but the breadth and the scale across all government departments, yes, certainly in terms of the cuts to social security and the cuts to social care, but across legal aid to disabled people, allowing them to fight in their tribunal cases, to education to make sure that health plans and so on were in place. It's been absolutely catastrophic. If we think, I think over the last 10 years, it's about 33 billion, and there's still cuts that are planned. So I personally believe that disabled people have been the most detrimentally affected group in society. And it says a lot for a society which has a government, has a state that is prepared to attack its most vulnerable. I think it still shocks me. And of course, the cumulative effect of that is more and more disabled people are living in poverty and isolation and exclusion. The early deaths of disabled people, I just cannot fathom. And when you talk to members of the public about that, they have no idea. They have no idea what's going on. And that, on top of the way that the social security system in particular dehumanizes disabled people, from sanctions to health assessments and more, I just think it is shocking. I think unfortunately we haven't seen within this pandemic the worst. I think that we are going to uncover that social security claimants, particularly sick and disabled people, will have died disproportionately to the public as a whole. And I think, again, we need to make sure that that's known and understood. Ellen, in her excellent book, has a section specifically on how do we fight back, what needs to happen, how do we change. And she uses the example of the UN investigation, and it is an excellent example because it brings in some of the key elements that I think are about how you get policy to change when you've got the likes of a government, either Cameron Clegg or now Johnson. And the key element there was that all disabled people, all different groups got united, got behind this one drive. But if we then to look at what's happened, not as much as I know we want to happen has happened. And so we need to look at beyond that in terms of what the other levers for change at our disposal are. And from my observations, for what they're worth, I'm just throwing it in, but I think I mentioned about the importance of working together and be united. We are a disparate group, and it is important that we are united in what our demands are. Strong leadership, another absolutely fundamental point to change. Identifying common agendas with other stakeholders, including the media, and that, you know, Ros will be able to say that the reason she's been involved, not just because she's a person of integrity and believes in the appalling things that are happening to disabled people need to be challenged, but because it sells papers. So how do we bring in the media? How do we bring in other politicians as well? One of the changes around universal credit, when we managed to get the reduction in the initial wait, which was 6 weeks for universal credit, was that we managed to get some of the Conservatives involved in that. So it's how you lever in other support, and fundamentally about winning hearts and minds of the public. And I think we are, I think, have an opportunity, and that was my final point about timing and opportunism. So we know we were pushing on an open door if we look at the British Social Attitudes Survey, that more people were starting to see what was happening to disabled people as unacceptable. But we need to build on that. And I think for all the bad in the pandemic, there are opportunities as well. We have 3 million new universal credit claimants. That's more than double. And for many, it's the first time they've ever used the social security system. And I know from the inquiry that the Work and Pension Select Committee has just undertaken that this has been an absolute shock to them. So how can we use that experience to understand what our social security system is doing to people, and particularly disabled people? So for me, this is, as I say, a key opportunity in terms of how we change the social security system as a whole for the better, but especially for disabled people. You know, I believe we can build that better and have a new social contract for the British people, with the British people, and as I say, a decision making at the heart of what we do. Thanks so much, Steph. That's all I have to say. But I look forward to listening to others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. So our next speaker will be Laura Picook, who is the National Secretary of the People's Assembly, and until recently was Labour MP for North West Durham. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, and hello everybody who is watching this very important celebratory event, the book launch of Ellen Clifford's book. And how you've written a book in this time, I do not know. An amazing achievement, but importantly too, making the connection between the capitalist system and the way in which disabled people are treated. Solidarity too with disabled people against the cuts. I know I've worked in the past with DPAC campaigners, campaign against the cuts, against the shambolic rollout of universal credit, against the principles and ethos behind universal credit system, because of course it's not just the practicalities, there are political ideologies behind the system. And then of course against the system of personal independent payments and the way it treats people and the work capability assessment. It's absolutely crucial in my view to see the treatment of and provision for disabled people in society through an anti-capitalist framework, if we're to find the solutions to the abuses and harm that has and will be outlined tonight. The perception of what people can contribute within a system towards production and towards profit is central in the minds of those who operate, say, multinational corporations and governments across the world. And they, of course, have very often a crude, stereotypical, misguided idea about what disabled people can contribute, as has been so eloquently set out tonight. For those whose ideology, though, centers on complete freedom of the market, so private business having the freedom to behave in whatever way they like. The principle, of course, being the pursuit of profit and the sucking up of wealth in a fewer and fewer hands. You can see that a social security system isn't necessarily their central concern, especially if that means either a different economic system or a more just and more equitable taxation system. Through austerity, I don't need to tell anybody watching this, but it has to be repeated because this was a political decision. Through austerity, we have seen the dismantling of the social security system. It has been decimated. So if ever there was a time, a manual to bear witness of that dismantling, that creation of so much fear, now is the time. And very, very pleased to hear that Ellen's book, although I haven't got a copy of it yet, I will be ordering the book, is also a call to action. But this system has at the heart of it so much fear, so much trauma associated with the processes and assessment. The privatization of the processes have been an unmitigated disaster, and the amount that we ask people to live on in society is absolutely shameful. It's just been mentioned, but I know many of you who have been campaigning for a higher rate of statutory sick pay, who've been working really hard to explain the brutality of the system. It feels painful to suddenly have people talk about it as though these experiences are a new phenomenon. When you know you've been living through it, you know that they are nothing new. You've been campaigning for a decade against these cuts, just like all of the activists. And I know the synergy, all of the activists in the People's Assembly, of course they're not. Of course, they're nothing new. But what coronavirus has done is draw so many more people into the system. And now they can see that you have been vindicated. And we have to build on this much broader experience of the system in our campaigning efforts. Because when we speak about it in future, people will have felt the system themselves. And I know it shouldn't take that, but I'm saying that is one thing we can use in our campaigning priorities. And as Ellen set out in her Navarra piece, cuts to benefits made up 50% of the 2010 austerity plan. It wasn't an economic necessity to make those cuts. Philip Alston, in his extreme poverty report, the United Nations Special Rapporteur, said, and I quote, "Those with disabilities are not," terminology I know Deepak doesn't use, "are also highly vulnerable to cuts in local government services, particularly within social care, which has left them shouldering more of the cost of care. This has driven many families with a person with a disability to breaking point." As I say, that was a quote from that report. And that report, I remember the day that it came out, many of you will too. I mean, it was staggering, these findings, a UN Special Rapporteur making such bold statements about extreme poverty in the United Kingdom, and there was barely a murmur in the mainstream media because the politicians here and globally are very often shielded from accountability, from having to answer for their political ideology and the harm it creates. We know, sisters, brothers, friends who are watching, that austerity 2.0 is coming down the line unless we stop it. So redundancies, cuts, austerity is not a necessity. And the People's Assembly, alongside, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, DPAC will ramp up the activism in solidarity with you. The government they've failed disabled people. They've failed in their handling of this crisis. And that change that we thought was coming through Jeremy Corbyn, and his leadership is not coming anymore. So it's within our hands. It really is within our hands. And there is so much to be fearful of and negative about right now. But we know that the government has changed its mind. It has changed course because of pressure from people. And we know that we can do that again through our collective action. And first of all, and this is where I'll conclude, Chair, we need to ensure that our meetings on the left, our activism is accessible, that it includes the people that we talk about all of the time, that we demand, that new society that we demand is designed by the people who know intimately how things could be different, but fundamentally that we need a different economic system. And to those working class people who start to feel scared at this point, who worry what would happen to their sense of security, income, their opportunities, comfort and joy, do we really have that in this system? Do disabled people in the United Kingdom have that? Do working class women, do black men in this country, in the UK, have that security? Do working class people really have it? What if we were to be honest and say that the alternative that we are trying to create would feel more secure? Opportunities would be plentiful. Life would be much more secure. It will be down to our activism, our campaigning that will determine our future. And this book will help serve as a manual. I'm going to get it. I hope you will too. Thanks so much. Join the People's Assembly, join DPAC.
Thank you, Laura. Let's put that on. Thank you so much. Those are really powerful words. I just want to echo the call to action that you've put in there, really focusing on how we need to be a model for what we want to see in society through here. So I will hand over to Anne Galpin from the National Union of Journalists, co-chair of the TUC Disabled Workers Committee and a DPAC member as well. So thank you. Got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. Like previous speakers, I'm just thrilled to bits to be here to launch this book, which Ellen's put her heart and soul into. I've worked with Ellen since, well, for over a decade now, the decade that this book is covering and reporting on in such an important way. She, like me, shares a passion for forging deeper understanding and greater formal production between trades unions and the deaf and disabled people's movement, and like me straddles the both. She's a fine, upstanding member of Unite. She's been at nearly every disabled workers conference I've attended and often been a panelist, often spoken, always been there to lend support and solidarity. And just sometimes just having her in the room instills confidence because we know we've got a good one on our side. And all and any disabled person, and many of our allies too, will find passages in Ellen's, sorry, I'm not a good or natural speaker, will find passages in Ellen's book that speak to our own lived experience. For myself, as a disabled woman living with mental distress, this starts right at the beginning of her preface, where she writes, "The impact of my impairment has meant that on my best days, getting each word out required an effort that felt like pushing through a fog of self-doubt. The worst days felt more like having to punch them through a wall." To me, this honesty, this candidness is all the more reason to treasure Ellen and this, her new book. Her book also references my late co-chair, Sean McGovern, on page 2112. She says, as Sean McGovern, a long-standing disabled campaigner and disability representative on the TUC General Council, told me, when Corbyn decided to run for the leadership of the Labour Party with John McDonnell at his side, disabled people knew that they had a prospective leadership team who understood disabled people and their issues. Oh, and I have to tell you, I don't want to be on, feel like I'm on message, but remember trade unions were the original Nothing About Us Without Us movement. We're why there is a Labour Party. When trades unions created the Labour Party, our aim was to ensure the voices of working people were heard in Parliament. And so we fundamentally understand the disabled people movement slogan, Nothing About Us Without Us. I I'm here with two hats on. Though a DPAC member, I'm here to talk about the trade unions, and in particular my own union, where we're a very small disabled members council. It's a lean union, the National Union of Journalists, and we find we welcome opportunities to explore campaigning with the disabled people's movement and the wider trade union movement. Disabled trade unionists are part of the representation and decision-making roles as TUC activists, as well as disability activists in our union and within the trade union, disabled trade unionists. By having disabled activists within the NUJ, we gain opportunities to influence our colleagues across the media to improve their understanding on how they report on disability issues. A well-known friend to us all is John Pring of Disability News Service, and of course Ros preceding me just now writes fantastically, as do many other journalists who understand and report on the social model in social model language. We're not only active within our union, though, as disabled people, as disability activists. My NEC colleague also chairs the Photography Council, and she finds the as a photographer, not as a disabled member, she finds this platform for promoting disability message to the mainstream, as she does with her job on the NEC. And this is something to remember to all of us in the room who are trade unionists, as well as DPAC members. We need to empower each other to go for mainstream roles. We may and often do choose to be disability reps within our unions, but we don't have to accept the expectation only to represent on disability issues. Rather, we can use our lived experience to influence decisions taken through a range of roles within trade unions. In subtle ways, we can further disability equality as well as being disability activists. But we still need more visibility. We need to make sure we are finding ways to represent all disabled trade unionists, wherever they are, whoever they are. And for all disabled trade unionists to know we are here and working on their behalf. It's worth noting within our own union that 43% of disabled members who responded to our December-January survey, so that's pre-COVID, were freelance. That's opposed to 30% of the overall membership. So there's a huge difference in disabled journalists likely to be freelance. And you think anyway, if you think of how many of us freelance, which is not an easy way to make a living, how many of us have been put into this situation because it's the only way we can manage working and our impairments? Or is it because employers don't feel safe to employ us? I think I might be running over time, Stephanie, is that so? I had so much more to tell you. I had so much more to speak, and I just wanted to bring solidarity from the trade union movement. 5.6 million members and growing, 1 million of us disabled. Well done, Ellen. I look forward to reading more of your book.
Thank you so much, Anne. Sorry, there are so many people today.
No, sorry, Anne.
You were speaking
just happy to have been here.
Thank you. I would like to bring our next speaker, Professor Peter Beresford, Professor of Citizen Participation at the University of Essex and also co-chair of Shaping Our Lives. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and a real hello to everyone. As you've said, I'm Peter Beresford, primarily today from Shaping Our Lives. We are a national service user and disabled people-led organisation, proud that we're still going after more than 20 years. And I want to bring a strong message of support both to Ellen and her book, which I think for the amount of time she took to do it is an unbelievable achievement, but also for DPAC and colleague organisations. It's so nice to be here today, even in these difficult circumstances. to be here to support the issues which we are all fighting for. This is going to be, I think, a long struggle, but we do long term, don't we? I'm a long-term user of mental health services, and I see myself as surviving them as much as, if not more than, being helped by them. The experience which has left the biggest mark on me, and it wasn't as bad when I was receiving them, was my experience of welfare benefits. And I know that that is far worse now than in my time. Mental health service users do and don't identify as disabled people. There's variations, but the service system and the welfare benefit system and welfare reform don't make any such distinctions. We are all people to be attacked by welfare reform. The benefit system sometimes seems to show even more ignorance of the situation and difficulties of mental health service users than it does of people with physical and sensory impairments, because it can't see obvious things to interpret us as having something wrong with us, which is how they do it. So therefore, it seems they sometimes seem to think that we must be especially dodgy amongst a dodgy group, deviant and scrounging. And the psychiatric system seems to have long had particular difficulty in treating Black lives with equality, seeing Black lives as mattering and challenging their own routine tendencies to impose control, constraint, custody, and sometimes violence on Black and minority ethnic people service users. We know that Black and some minority ethnic groups get the worst experiences often of the psychiatric system. So I want to support and stress the key messages from Ellen's book, that we must have politics and policy that sees the whole life of people, the full identity of people, all the different discriminations that they may be subject to in developing policy for welfare benefits, social care, independent living, and other mainstream social policies, so that they are holistic and understand all of what we are, sustainable in terms of our planet, anti-discriminatory, humane, and social justice based. We want policies and services that support people, not control them, enhance our opportunities rather than ration things out. We know that neoliberal politics is never going to do this. We must fight for oppositions and opposition parties to help them understand, to have support for those that will take on these values, goals, and aims at the heart of their politics and policies for the future, if there's to be real change and all lives to matter. Black lives, disabled lives, survivor lives. That's all I want to say. I just want to add my voice to many others. Think sometimes of all the good colleagues and survivor friends I've lost en route, that will make sure one day we do get there, despite all the barriers placed in our way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I would like to call our next speaker now. We will have a break after Ellen reads passages from her book after this. So this will be our last speaker before Ellen reads from her book, which I'm sure many of us are waiting to hear. So Emeritus Professor Colin Barnes will now speak, who founded the Disability Studies Centre at the University of Leeds. Thank you.
Hello?
We can hear you, Con. We can hear you.
I can't see you. Can you see me?
If you turn your camera on, we should be able to see you.
It says start my video.
Yes, and we were able to see you before. Yes, we can see you now.
Oh, but I can't see you. It's just terrible.
You won't be able to see me, so that's normal.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry if all I can say. Let's get right to the very beginning. I am. Besides, are you still there? Hello?
Yes.
because it's got Peter Beresford's name up, and I'm just confused. Anyway, I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. I'm not going to make it longer than that because you're late already. And basically, you've got other people who are saying virtually the same things or other things that are just as important as what I'm going to say. I am a disabled person, and both my parents were disabled, and all three of us experienced exclusion and discrimination when I was younger, basically. Needless to say more anymore. I'm a special school survivor and, in inverted commas, emeritus professor of disability studies at Leeds. But that's something that I came to late in life, which is great. I'm now semi-retired. And I want to just, rather than go into great detail, I want to remind everybody that disability is essentially a capitalist creation as we understand it today. It is a product of capitalism, no question about that. There is evidence that there was some discrimination and prejudice and misunderstandings about people with impairments and various forms of conditions prior to the dawn of capitalism. But when capitalism came into existence, associated with industrialization and new work processes, disabled people or people who were deemed unable or unfit to engage in the new forms of work systems, the wage labor, all those things meant that people who were unfit or unable, unwilling to participate in that particular system were excluded. Disabled people, as they were termed, were stigmatized, medicalized, labeled, incarcerated in various forms of institutions. And what's interesting about all this was it was right up until the 1960s that those kind of policies continued to exist. As I say, my family particularly was subject to that kind to exclusion and institutionalization in the 1940s and 50s. So this is something which is quite a revelation for lots of people. What changed all that was the politicization of disability by disabled people going back to the turn of the 20th century with the National Union of the Blind and Disabled, but most importantly, in the post-Second World War years, by user-led organizations, organizations of disabled people, which politicized and changed understanding about disability, basically. And as a result, many policies were introduced to address some of the needs of disabled people. Organizations which were important in doing this, basically, was the Disablement Incomes Group, formed in 1965 by disabled women, two disabled women, the Union of Physically Impaired Segregation, major organization which created basically the social model of disability and many other things. The British Council of Organisations of Disabled People, which came into existence in 1981. And at its height, BCODP had a membership of over 120 organisations in 1992. I joined BCODP in 1989 as a researcher, basically, for the Anti-Discrimination Project. So there was many organisations of disabled people arguing for a change of policy, equal rights, and so on. And we did have a degree of success. Important policies included the Independent Living Fund, the Disability Discrimination Act and its various amendments that went right through until the 2006. the Disability Rights Commission, Disability Living Allowance, all these things were introduced during the 1990s and early noughties. But what's significant about those policies, that during the beginning of the 21st century, they were systematically neutralized or cancelled, particularly since 2008 and the beginning of the economic recession, and especially with the coming to power of a right-wing Tory government. Its policies of austerity and the support of the British, the majority of British media, which are definitely right-wing. So consequently, we've had a decade of oppression, which everybody who's involved with disability will be fundamentally aware of. What's significant here, of course, is that all of this has been significantly exacerbated by the current situation, the growing concerns about climate change, growing inequality amongst, and the degree of inequality amongst the general population. All these issues are coming to the fore at this particular point in time. The problems of disabled people have been compounded by the austerity process, and now particularly with COVID-19 and the treatment of disabled and elderly people by this apology for a government. The point here, of course, is that this brings to the important issue here. Helen's book, The War on Disabled People, covers these issues with comprehension, with authority, and it's accessible. It's a good read if you're interested in this subject. And it is, in my view, essential read for everyone committed to and involved in the struggle for a change, a political change, and a shift towards a social and economic environment which includes all people and not those deemed at the not those at the top of the social hierarchy. So
we're just running a bit short on time. If you just sum up for me, that would be great.
Sorry.
Just sum up for me, please. Sorry, we're running out of time.
I'm finishing now, don't worry. We're working towards a radical change. It's going to be very difficult because theoretically this lot have got in for another 4 or 5 years. But the evidence of history shows that history can be changed through disabled people and their allies. And this is why ongoing activism is fundamental. Grassroots activism and involvement is the only way we will change this appalling situation. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry to go on too long. Bye-bye.
It's okay. Thank you so much. No, I'm sorry to cut you off because I was glued to everything you were saying. So thank you very much. And now, without further ado, we're going to have Ellen read a passage or a few passages from her book, actually. So, Ellen Clifford.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. I'm going to warn you all that I am feeling a little bit teary because I thought that tonight would be a little bit more about the politics and less people saying nice things about me. Everyone who's spoken tonight and is due to speak are campaigners and people involved in the struggle who I admire enormously, but they're only a small fraction of the people that I've come to admire over the past 20 years of campaigning. I in particular just want to start firstly by thanking Stephanie for stepping in last minute after our wonderful Mandy Colleran experienced an impairment related injury, and also to Ellen Morrison for all the backroom support, and there's a lot because there's so many speakers, because I wanted everyone just to get their voices heard tonight, but also generally to them both for being great comrades and shining examples of the valuable contribution to the struggle that can be made by disabled women. As Steph explained, in this part, I am going to read a couple of extracts from various chapters in the book. But before that, I want to pay tribute to all the amazing campaigners and friends that we've lost since 2010. And I know that so many of us are feeling them with us tonight and missing their presence. Most recently, Sean McGovern, who did so much, as I think has been said a few times, to unite the disabled peoples and the trade union movements. But specifically tonight, also Debbie Jolly, who Linda mentioned, co-founder of DPAC, along with Linda, who we tragically lost in November 2016. And within DPAC, we still miss her each and every day. Without the mentoring and support that Debbie and Linda both gave me, I'd never have been able to punch through those walls to write a book, to write anything probably. So, chapter 1, who are disabled people? One consistent and stable characteristic throughout capitalism has been the inextricable link between disability and poverty. Disability is both cause and consequence of poverty. The social model of disability gives people with different impairments something to unite behind, just as different Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities are united by the experience of racial oppression. Focusing on shared barriers experienced across impairment groups gives people the potential to join together in greater numbers with greater shared power. The focus on material barriers is also able to draw in those who may not previously have identified as disabled. Looking both to the past and to the situation in Britain today, we can see that disabled identities are most clearly defined at moments of struggle for the material resources and conditions that people with impairments need in order to survive. Actions, although impairment specific from the past, convey a sense of what today would be termed disability pride. They also invariably occur concurrently with wider struggles over the division of wealth between the working class and the ruling class. During the Great Depression, the League of the Physically Handicapped fought job discrimination in the United States. Historians Paul K. Longmore and David Goldberger comment, the greatest influence on their political thinking and strategizing was the Depression-era climate of crisis and desperate activism. Since 2010, people who previously may not have identified as disabled have become involved in collective action against attempts by the UK government to cut and deny social security payments. Newer activists come from a far wider background of impairment than was present in earlier iterations of the disability movement. In these moments, disabled people find pride in our identities as we transcend the victim role of the oppressed to fight shared injustice. Chapter 3. From asylums to independent living, disabled people on the edge of society. Support for disabled people who've not worked and will never do so in a way perceived as productive does not flow from capitalism. It's something that can be fought for, granted in the interests of avoiding discontent among the wider populace. But as part of the social wage, it is of minimum priority. The term social wage is applied to spending that keeps the workforce employable and fit, such as education and healthcare. But as economist Chris Harman points out, it can also be applied to unemployment benefits for those able to show they are able and willing to work, and to pension schemes dependent on a lifetime of labour. Harman notes, the capitalist wants contented workers to exploit in the same way that a farmer wants contented cows. Workers cannot be expected to labour with any commitment to their work unless there is some sort of promise that they will not starve to death once they reach retirement age. Support for those unlikely to ever contribute to the labour market is of no direct interest to capitalists and is part of the social wage that governments will do their utmost to minimise accordingly. Analysis of the role that disability plays within capitalism leads to an understanding that full liberation from oppression for disabled people cannot be achieved under a system that puts profit before people. This is not to deny the importance in the here and now of challenging discrimination and campaigning for an equal standard of living for disabled people, regardless of impairment. We must fight for improvements, using as leverage the fact that capitalism prefers contented workers. More disabled people in Britain are living within the community now than in previous generations. As a result, the way we are treated has more of an impact on the wider working class. It can be difficult to raise awareness of what happens to disabled people because disability issues continue to be marginalised within wider society. Yet we are a substantial proportion of the population, and we have friends, family, and neighbours. The public cares sufficiently enough about what happens to disabled people for contemporary governments to be nervous of being seen to mistreat us. This can be used to resist changes that would harm disabled people and to fight for improvements. Ultimately, though, the intrinsic role that disability plays within a capitalist system means that, as expressed by Mike Oliver and Colin Barnes, only the transformation of capitalist society will ensure the full inclusion of disabled people and indeed all socially oppressed groups. Chapter 11, Forefront of the Fight Back. Forcing Atos, a global corporation with a revenue measured in billions, out of its contract to deliver the WCA was another significant victory for campaigners. As the WCA began to roll out, disability and benefit claimant networks soon became aware of its dangers. These were communicated through the wider anti-austerity movement, and individual stories of wrongful benefit decisions and the human misery they were causing started to appear in the left-wing media. Protests against Atos, organised by groups such as DPAC and Boycott Workfare, failed to permeate into the mainstream. With the benefit fraud narrative dominating the media and political rhetoric, it was an issue that was not readily accepted as part of the public agenda. That was until Atos's sponsorship of the London 2012 Paralympic Games handed campaigners a golden opportunity. We knew we'd done our job when Cameron and Osborne were greeted by booing crowds as they attempted to hand out medals to the disabled athletes. To coincide with the Paralympics, DPAC and UK Uncut planned a week of action entitled the Anti-Atos Games. This was supported by a wide range of anti-austerity campaigns, DDPOs, deaf and disabled people's organisations, and trade unions. The activities commenced with our own opening ceremony, which was a parody of the assessment process. Over the week, there was a day of protests outside local Atos assessment centres up and down the country, a memorial protest to commemorate those who died and suffered at the hands of the WCA, which appeared on Newsnight, and social media activities targeting Atos and the Department for Work and Pensions. 2 separate investigative documentaries on the work capability assessment aired that same week. The final event was a mass protest outside Atos headquarters on the 31st of August 2012. It was attended by around 450 to 500 people. At the same time, in a parallel action, disabled activists and allies acting as buddies for those needing personal assistance occupied the lobby of the DWP's headquarters, Caxton House. The Atos protest journeyed across London to join them, and a celebratory atmosphere took hold, inspired by this simple act of defiance. The mood turned to one of determination when inappropriate tactics on the part of the Met Police in separating the 2 groups at the entrance of the government department resulted in one wheelchair user having his shoulder dislocated and an occupier becoming DPAC's first member to be arrested. The remaining occupiers held out, and footage of them emerging to the cheering crowd waiting outside made the primetime news that evening. By the end of that week, Atos had become a household name. And just for the final passage that I was going to read, from the final chapter, chapter 12, concluding thoughts, where do we go from here? The ongoing war against disabled people. In December 2019, the most right-wing government in modern British history was re-elected with a significantly increased majority. This was disastrous news for disabled people. Under Boris Johnson, the Conservatives now had the parliamentary power not simply to carry on in the same direction with the continuation of policies that are growing inequality, poverty, and immiseration, but to ramp up their attacks and implement welfare reform measures they were previously beaten back from achieving. An early indication of what the election result meant for disabled people was the decision announced in the New Year's Honours List to award Ian Duncan Smith a knighthood. Duncan Smith had not held a ministerial appointment since his period as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. The honour effectively endorses the dismantling of the social security safety net over which he presided. It also suggests full government commitment to rolling out Duncan Smith's big idea, universal credit, in spite of the well-evidenced harms it's caused and is causing. Disabled people should be under no illusion about who Boris Johnson is, however anti-establishment and affable he tries to portray himself. Both Johnson and his close advisor, Dominic Cummings, have expressed views that have been described as textbook examples of eugenic opinion. Speaking to city bankers during his time as Mayor of London, Johnson said, "Whatever you think of the value of IQ tests, it is surely relevant to a conversation about equality that as many as 16% of our species have an IQ below 85, while about 2% have an IQ above 130. The harder you shake the pack, the easier it will be for some cornflakes to get to the top. And for one reason or another, boardroom greed, or, as I am assured, the natural and God-given talent of boardroom inhabitants, the income gap between the top cornflakes and the bottom cornflakes is getting wider than ever." Inequality is a state that Johnson and Cummings both regard as natural and even desirable for the functioning of society. Progressive disability policy making will not be on their agenda. What we must be prepared for are regressive measures deliberately aimed at resegregating and isolating disabled people in the better interests of society, according to a eugenicist view, in reality, in the interests of profit making. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Thank you. Okay, we're going to have a small break here. Originally, it was planned to be 20 minutes. There will be music from John Kelly, aka Rockin' Paddy, who's also a veteran campaigner and member of DPAC's National Steering Group. I just like to ask John if it's possible for us to have 15 minutes break instead of 20, just because we're running so over time. Yeah? Okay, thank you. Okay, so 15 minutes from now.
Go! Thank you so much. I've known Ellen as an activist. I've now known her as a writer. I'm so proud to that. But the most important thing I know Ellen as is a friend who supported me through the closure of the ILF, PIP, and a whole load of other things. And I'm so proud that she's asked me to play a few tunes. So I'm going to just get on with them because I've got some requests. I've got to get them done. And I'll finish with one for John McDonnell. I've had to learn this one, so do let me get to that last song. I'd like to thank Becky for BSL interpreting my songs as well. So this one's for everyone who joins Deepak on the streets every time you protest. Well, the government had an idea and Parliament made it law. They say disabled people can't live independently anymore. Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? They say that we're a burden. They say we're on the scrounge. Say our life's not worth living. They stick us in heaven's waiting lounge. Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Well, they've given us our own minister. He's supposed to fight the cause, but every time that we ask him, He sticks in another capability clause. Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Because of all these changes, thousands of us have died. And if these changes keep on happening, what more proof do we need that you have lied? Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, my boy? Which side are you on? Are you on? Thank you. Hope you're singing along with that. This one's for Sean. Ellen asked me to play this one, and let's hope I get through it. I met my love by the gas yard wall, dreamed a dream by the old canal. I kissed my girl by the factory wall. Dirty old town, dirty old town, dirty old town, dirty old town. The clouds are drifting all across the moon. Cats are prowling on their beat. There springs a girl from the streets at night. Dirty old town, dirty old town, dirty old town, dirty old town. I'm gonna make me a big sharp axe, shining steel, tempered in our fire. I'll chop you down like an old dead tree. Dirty old town, dirty old town, dirty old town, dirty old town. That was for Sean. Hope it was right for you up there. This next song is one that we do on the streets, and I'm just kind of, because I can't see any of you, and I wish I could. I wish we could all, hug. And the great thing about our movement is the solidarity, and there's lots of oppressed people out in this world who need our solidarity right now. So this is for everyone who is fighting, and we will continue to fight. We are not going away. This one, Paula reminded me of this one, so I'm just going to stick this one in. It's called Battle of Whitehall. You gotta chain yourself to the buses, show 'em what the fuss is, get us on the political map. They can try and talk us down, we'll head right into town. We won't take any more of your crap. There's a battle in Whitehall, and you're in our sight, sing along. There's a battle in Whitehall, fighting for our civil rights, civil disobedience, public are our audience. We ain't no freak show anymore. We're vocal and we're loud, disabled and we're proud. No sympathy, but empathy give to the cause. There's a battle in Whitehall, anger in our sights. There's a battle in Whitehall, fighting for our civil rights. Have you ever thought apartheid was wrong? Have you ever thought homophobia was wrong? Have you ever thought that sexism, racism, fascism was ever so wrong? So is this Lady Olga Maitland, proof she's not on this land. Perhaps segregation ain't so bad after all. But John Smith, he has gone. Well, maybe this could be his song, as the battle cry, civil rights will never die. There's a battle in Whitehall, anger in our sights. There's a battle in Whitehall, we're fighting for our civil rights. Whew. Just bear with me 1 second while I change things over a little bit. I hope this is okay. I've got 2 quick songs to do. Just for the signer and the palantypist, I'll probably just do the 2 verses of this one and then move on to the next one. This one is written by a friend of mine called Ted Barnes, and it's all about the hope and resilience that is amongst us. I'm so proud to be part of DPAC, and disabled artists having an action online on Wednesday, so please look out for it. Hashtag we shall not be removed, because we've got to keep fighting. Our voices need to be amplified. This is called There's a Window, Winds of Change Will Come. There's a window of hope in our dreams. There's a promise of hope on the way. There's a glory to come when the day has been won and we're caught in the winds of change. If we don't come together where we stand, there's a price we will have to pay. If you stand on your own, you'll be lost and alone, swept away on the winds of change. Raise your hand to the blue sky, forever hold them high. Make a stand together, and the winds of change will come. Raise your hand to the blue sky, forever hold them high. Make a stand together, and the winds of change will come. Yes, the winds of change will come. Yes, the winds of change will come. It's my final song. Hope it's been right, and I hope I'm just under 15 minutes. John McDonald is on next. Asked if I could play this one, and I've never done it in my life, but it's such an important song, and I just hope I give it a little bit of justice. This is Pete Seeger's version, and mixed with Mahalia Jackson. I hope you can sing along at home and sign along. We shall overcome. We shall shall overcome. We shall overcome someday, yeah. 'Cause deep in my heart I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll go hand in hand. We'll go hand in hand. We'll go hand in hand someday. 'Cause deep in my heart I do believe we shall overcome someday. My last verse. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. 'Cause deep in my heart I do believe we shall overcome someday. Thank you. Solidarity. Lots of love to everyone out there. Thank you. And thank you, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Rockin' Paddy. I did not want to cut you off, and you were perfectly on time. So thank you very much. And I don't think that our next speaker needs much introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. So it's my pleasure to announce John McDonnell, one of the earliest members of DPAC, and also until recently Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer for Jeremy Corbyn's government. Thank you, John. You'll have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Stephanie. I think I've got one of the most important tasks of the evening. Is that right? Where I've got to read out the winners of the draw. Is that right, Steph?
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, let me just go through the winners of the draw for copies of the Helen's book, and it's donated by Z Books. Thanks, Z Books, for doing that. They are Gary Kane from Psychiatric Survivors Speak Out, Sharon Gray, Claire Cozier, Alison St. Pierre, and Davinda Gill. Okay, so they're the winners of the draw. Congratulations, and you'll get a copy of Ellen's book. Very briefly, because I just want to say thanks to John Kelly. The man is so talented, and he brings his talent to the cause, and it's just tremendous. And I asked him to do the song "We Shall Overcome" because that's been the spirit of everything that we've campaigned for in terms of DPAC. We're going to win. We are winning. We will win. They will never ignore us. We will never allow them to defeat us. Just briefly, I just want to say this about Helen. Helen, as you know, has been just a stalwart campaigner. We all know that. She's someone we respect for her commitment and love for the just deep support she's given us all as a group, but also personally. And that's how much we value her. But what she's brought in this book now is a narrative in a way which I think we can use really effectively in the campaign. We've had a whole series of books, Peter Beresford's here and others, and Colin, there's a whole range of different books as well, which have brought arguments that we've been able to use. And this adds to that. And it is a really good narrative of the history of how disabled people have been treated, but also the key aspect of it is the point that Colin made, that nothing has been given to disabled people. Nothing. It's had to be taken. It's had to be taken as a result of years and years of struggle. And you look back on it, the heroes that we've had, the heroes and heroines that we've had in the movement who've batted away time and time again. It does that for us. It brings us a narrative. And that one principle that actually it is as a result of the campaigning by disabled people themselves, not willing to take it anymore. Had enough, we need change. And that's, I think, the motivating factor of our whole movement, that people have had enough. They're not going to take it anymore. They want radical change. And that's been the theme right the way through. The other thing is the point that both Colin and Ellen have made, and Ellen in her final chapter. We will never obtain our desire for equality, our desire for a decent life within this economic system. You cannot do, and it isn't just disabled people, it's everybody. A society based upon the economy, which is simply motivated by profit, will never be able to satisfy the needs of people. We want to build a society which is based upon satisfying people's needs. And to do that, you have to ensure that there's equality, both in terms of the way people are treated, but also the equality in the way that what people can contribute. And that's why we've campaigned for the basic principle of equality. And the struggle is, I think, in this recent period, and Ellen's been a key part of this, we've rebuilt a disabled people's movement in this country. And it sometimes it is strong and sometimes it wanes. And for a period, as a result of what could only be described as a campaign of oppression by successive Tory governments and others, what we found was the movement was being battered into subservience at one point, and then people stood up and said that we've had enough, we're not taking it, and rebuilt the movement. And DPAC has been a key element of that. And Ellen's going to be embarrassed about all this, I know, but as well as the direct action campaigns that we've undertaken in the recent years, which I think have been fundamental lessons to the whole of the labour and trade union movement, actually, and to others who are campaigning for their rights. I think it's DPAC can provide a model that can succeed. But also you need people who can articulate the argument to the media and to others, and even to MPs. Ellen plays that role so, I think, with sophistication. She won't like me saying this, but with sophistication, getting the argument across and being able in the media and in discussions and when we're lobbying to be able to answer every question thrown at us. That's the role she's played. And I just think it's been fundamental to the successes that we've had. But I agree with her. And it was a tragedy that Jeremy and I and the party, we didn't win the election in December. We knew what was coming at us, a huge steamroller of the establishment and the media in particular, and the character assassination undertaken on Jeremy. It was appalling. But what's interesting since then, we've gone through a period of a bit of a mourning. I accept that. People got pretty fed up. But people are bouncing back, they're coming back. And again, Black Lives Matter demonstrations, I think, were fundamental to lifting everybody's spirits right through across the movement, whatever part of the movement you're in. And I think DPAC has played that role throughout. And we've got to play it again. And that means using every opportunity. It's exactly what John Kelly did, using cultural interventions, using the direct action campaigns when we come out of lockdown as much as we possibly can, the lobbying, the drafting up of alternative legislation, the presentation of policy in a way which we can convince people. So I think that this movement it's thriving as a result of the dedication and commitment of people like Ellen Clifford. And I can't pay enough tribute about the role that she's played in supporting us all and developing it. But this book, I think, will be fundamentally important. We need something, again, in our back pockets or in our handbags or in our bags or whatever, in our coat pockets, to be able to produce and say, look, read this, because this gives an analysis, a history of where we've come from, what our demands are and where we want to go. And it is embedded in an analysis, a political analysis of our society as well. So I think it's fundamentally important. And it's a major contribution, Ellen. I'm very, very grateful for what you've done in the book. And I know writing anything is a struggle. I've struggled enough just writing emails, let alone books. But I think the work that you've done, I think, is really, really is terrific. On the this coming period. We need to steel ourselves this campaign. The Tories have got a massive majority. We know that, but we also know no matter what majority in Parliament, we can defeat them by our mass mobilisations. So comrades, solidarity. And Ellen, thank you so much for your contribution and so much for this book.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. I'm sure that Ellen is blushing a little bit after that. Now we'll move on to the next part of our evening, which will be a small question and answer session. I was correct. Question and answer session with Mary Ellen Archer, who's an educator and activist with DPAC and Extinction Rebellion, amongst other campaigns. So, Mary, it's all yours.
Hello, Stephanie. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can
see
you. Yes.
You can. Brilliant, because I can't see anything. Are you there, Ellen? I presume you are.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. I can see you this time. Okay. Right. So, questions. I'm going to start with the question from me, but it's a question I think many people would like to ask you. And that is, oh no, hang on, let me explain a little bit first before I start with that. If anyone else has questions that we don't answer in this session, if Ellen doesn't have time to answer, she will get around to answering them and will upload the answers onto DPAC's website, and it'll be circulated via social media. I think that's what I've got to say on that. Okay, so let's go straight into the questions then. So, why did you write the book, Ellen, and what do you hope it achieves? But also, how did you find and cope with the process of writing it, which I think would be quite hard for so many different reasons? And which bits did you find easiest and which bits were the hardest to write?
So I suppose I wrote it because a commissioning editor from Z Books called Ken Barlow contacted me and said, we realised we have a bit of a gap in terms of disability in our catalogue, and I've heard I should speak to you, and would you write a book on disability and what's been happening since 2010? And I jumped at the opportunity because I love reading, I love researching, I love writing. I think what I'd kind of forgotten though was that I don't like being singled out. I really enjoy being part of a collective. I think that humans are best when we're part of a interdependent collective. And I forgot that it would have to be my book rather than Deepak's book. And I think that was probably the hardest bit for me, that my name is on there rather than all the names of all the amazing campaigners like yourself and everyone involved tonight and so many others who have made the amazing grassroots a struggle from disabled people happen since 2010. I guess what I wanted to achieve, I suppose, initially, because I wasn't confident anyone would actually read it, but I think what I wanted to do was to put down on the historical record what actually happened, especially from an activist perspective. I think disabled people are very used to other people talking about us and writing our history for us. I know Mike Oliver, the late great Mike Oliver, before he died, he warned us that we needed to write our own history because it was already getting written for us. I've quite often been to meetings where people involved in kind of non-disabled academics have talked about the UN investigation, for example, the unprecedented investigation that took place in 2015, that the members of DPAC, such as Debbie Jolly, Linda Burnip, Bob Ellard, Anita Bellows, they triggered it, but they talk about it as if kind of just happened, or the UN decided to make it happen without even knowing or acknowledging the role that grassroots activism played in that happening. And I wanted to make sure that people know how change actually happens. It's quite convenient for the ruling class to present history as something, you know, any kind of changes are handed down to us from above. That's not how things happen, as John said. We only get progressive change when we unite and we demand that change. So I wanted to make sure that that account of how things actually happen, how change actually happens, was written down.
Thank you. So, and what were the bits that you found the hardest and easiest?
I think I enjoyed being able to write down our analysis, because I think people often portray Deepak as vulgar or thuggish. Those are words that have been used to describe us. But actually we have quite a thought through analysis behind what we do, a political analysis, and I wanted, I suppose, to put that down. So that was probably the easiest thing. It was very cathartic for me. The hardest thing was definitely doing it as me without, I mean, I had so much support from all of you, but the fact it was, yeah, I don't believe in individualism. I don't like being an individual. That bit's been horrible.
Okay, so let's go on to the other questions. The next one is from Jamie, who describes himself as an activist and campaigner, and always one to lead the chanting, which made me smile. So his question is in two parts. Part one is, what was your favorite, most impactful, in the words of our late friend and campaigner Stephen Asselford, Deepak naughtiness? In inverted commas. So that's part one of the question. And the second part is, with such superb and powerful voices for disabled people lost or sidelined from Parliament, how can we build on their good work?
I think it's lovely that Jamie's referenced Stephen. He was another person that we really miss. We only lost him at the end of last year. He described the direct actions that Deepak does as Deepak naughtiness, and he used to do it with such a big smile. Stephen was a person labelled with learning difficulties, who'd experienced a lot of oppression in his own life. He was, you know, he was so insightful, but often people would kind of ignore what he was saying when he actually had really good points to make, because he was disabled, because he had a learning difficulty, because he communicated in ways they couldn't always understand. And I think for him, when we would do a direct action that I would call cheeky, some people call thuggish, it made him feel, it gave him a sense of power to take part in it that he'd never felt before in his life. And I think that's there's a bit in the book, that in the resistance chapter, where I talk about why we do these things. And I think it's important. I mean, it can be impactful because society has a view of disabled people as, you know, passive victims. And when we challenge that and we do things where we're taking the offensive, it can make people notice. But also really important, it gives people hope. So when we did the Balls to the Budget protest, when Osborne was announcing a budget in Parliament at the same time that was going to, you know, cut loads of the off disability benefits. It was going to be horrendous for disabled people, and with allies we hung that massive banner opposite Parliament saying balls to the budget with two fingers literally on it. And it gave people who were about to be affected, were going to have their vital income affected, to see that on social media, it just brought them a smile. And people just need that hope to be able to carry on, but also to feel that we do have agency, that disabled people, despite what we face, have agency and can fight back. So that's why I love the idea of Deepak naughtiness. My favorite one, it's very difficult to answer because we've done so many, probably when I think the media called it the storming of Parliament, where ILF users were gathered in the lobby of the House of Commons and tried to get into the chamber while Cameron was doing Prime Minister's questions. I do, as I've said in the book, I think if a direct action like that had happened earlier, we may well have saved the ILF. We may well have done, but people weren't confident to do it. I think obviously people have a hope that there is someone in power that's going to look down and pity you and come in and rescue you. But the truth is, as John McDonnell has always told us all the way through, you build a movement and you build a grassroots movement, you put pressure from outside, and that's how you achieve change. So in relation, I think, to part 2 of Jamie's question, we have lost valuable allies within Parliament, but how we affect real change, as John always told us, is from outside, and that's what we have to carry on doing.
Excellent. Thank you. Hang on. Get my questions back up here. So I've got one final question, and that's from Mike Smith, who runs the Disabled People's Organisation REAL, and it's based in Tower Hamlets, London. His question is, disability is largely a label or construct placed on an individual by others rather than by self-definition, and in contrast to most other equality strands. Consequently, very few disabled people claim to be proud to be disabled. What do we have to do to create the level of anger required amongst disabled people to trigger a collective response as impressive as the Black Lives Matter campaign?
There's loads I want to say in response to that. How long have we got?
I have no idea. Who's in charge of time? Stephanie.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. So I think that another point that's made in the book is that many disabled people don't identify as disabled, but I think that increasingly under the material circumstances since 2010, more people have been, because we've got that definition under, well, with the DDA, now the Equality Act, and what a label of being disabled can access you can be the kind of material support you need to survive. So more and more people are being pushed out of society. The inequality gap is growing. If you fit the definition of disabled, you can then apply for things like disability benefits that may help you and support you to get by. So I think actually what we've seen are greater numbers of people identifying as disabled. They might not understand the social model of disability, but I think that this gives us an opportunity. And as I said in one of the extracts I read before the break, I think that we're strongest, disabled people are strongest in our struggle at moments when our material conditions are being contravened, and that offers us an opportunity to unite beyond the people who might previously have just identified as disabled. And I think we have to use those opportunities to bring people together to unite our resistance. I think though that we also need to be allying with other groups who are oppressed. So I think it's amazing. I know lots of disabled campaigners have been very involved in Black Lives Matter and what's been happening there. I think that we need to, I think one of the strengths of DPAC has been that we haven't seen ourselves in isolation. We haven't mistrusted non-disabled people. We've proactively gone out to seek alliances with other groups of working class people who are experiencing oppression and try to unite, because we know that we need the bigger numbers. I think the disabled people on our own, given all the barriers we face to getting out, I mean, the reason why we use direct action is because so few of us can get out for a protest. We're not going to mass thousands and thousands because of all those barriers. We need to be involved in the wider struggle. So in conclusion, I think that's what we need to do. I think Stephanie's telling us we have to shush now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank
Only
you.
because we're running over, but thank you so
Sorry.
much. Okay, so I wanted to listen to Ellen answer all of the questions, but just now we're going to move on to the next part of the meeting, which is about where do we go from here. So we've had lots of discussion today about grassroots action, and theory is very important to inform our practice and plan our responses to the challenges that are thrown towards us, but we can only make those sort of concrete changes happen if there's concrete activity. And we're going to hear from a series of disabled speakers and allies about what they see as the priorities for activists in the current climate and how disabled campaigners can be part of building a stronger, united alliance. So Paula Peters, Deepak SG and Chair of Bromley and Croydon Unite Community Branch. You have 5 to 3 minutes, please.
Hi, thanks, Stephanie, and good evening to everybody here. Hope you can all hear me. I just want to say, Ellen, your book is absolutely fantastic, and you know, I've read it cover to cover. I'm not going to give any spoilers to anyone, so I just want to get on with where are we with the campaigns, and it's universal credit with the managed migration due to start in a couple of weeks. So this is going to hit people who are on working tax credits, child tax credits, housing benefit, and income related JSA and ESA. We're going to see 7 million people transfer over in the next few years, which is going to have really horrendous consequences. But also we've seen with the coronavirus pandemic in the last couple of months, 2 million workers who have lost their jobs or been furloughed enter the benefit system for the very first time and having to claim universal credit to get through you know, this really bad time. And this includes self-employed people who've lost their incomes, and it's really important that we reach out to this group of people and bring them into our movement and help build the campaign around universal credit. And we need to talk about, you know, that universal credit is digital by default, and you know, with 13 million plus disabled people in the UK, a fifth of that number do not have access to a computer, do not know how to use one, and are having to go to the library to apply for universal credit and, you know, access the benefit, the justice system for appeals, with everything now going online. And integral to that is the library campaign. And we should point out that from a freedom of information request from the Huffington Post, since 2010, 846 libraries have closed their doors, 10,000 librarians have lost their jobs, and you know, we've also seen 32,000 computers removed from the libraries. And I want to pay tribute to a great campaign here in Bromley, where I'm from, where we've seen the library workers come together and take on Greenwich Leisure Limited, who took over the library contracts, because a lot of the library contracts have been outsourced to private providers like them, and they tried to turn the libraries into gyms. They've really taken it to GLL, and they've taken strike action over 3 times, the last one for over 10 months. And we've been out on the picket lines with them. And I think it's really important that we build the campaign to bring trade unionists and everything together. And of course, with cuts to law centres, CABs, benefits advisors, people are going to the library workers to help them fill out, you know, the forms for universal credit and to apply for housing and everything like that. So it's really important that we also get trade union reps in the workplace trained up on universal credit. And this is something that the trade unions have severely lacked recently, and they really do need to step up to the plate and see what's coming, because, you know, universal credit's not going to stop until we stop it. And I want to pay tribute to there's some great campaign work going on out there at the moment with you know, Scrap Universal Credit Alliance, and you know, the Norfolk campaign against Universal Credit, the Stop and Scrap campaign up there. They're doing great work, and a lot of people can really learn a lot from them. They're out in the community telling people what their rights are, you know, and doing some amazing work. And in Sheffield, that's happening as well. And it's really important that we get together with our local trade union councils, local trade union reps, local other grassroots activists, and build a great community campaign around Universal Credit. And we need to get the PCS working group on side with this, because, you know, 42% of DWP workers are also, you know, about to claim Universal Credit. Many of them are on 0 hours contracts and claiming in work benefits to live, and while they're working as well. And we really do need to shift this narrative, worker versus claimant. I think that's really, really important, and we need to shift it so that, you know, you're a claimant, whether you're in work or out of work, you know, you're needing to claim support to live, and that's really important. And I think that, you know, we've got to do a lot more work around the heinous rape clause and get that abolished. But ultimately, we need to stop and scrap Universal Credit and get rid of it. And the last thing I want to say is the other thing we need to campaign on is the oppression and police brutality. And there's a Ruderman Family Foundation report that's been released that in the US, 1/3 to 50% of disabled people are actually killed by police brutality. And, you know, police brutality in the UK is also ramping up against disabled people when we've been on protest. So thank you, Ellen, for an amazing book. Love you very much. Thank you for having me on tonight. And everybody out there, buy Ellen's book, To the Wider Left. See you later. Bye.
Thank you so much, Paula. Yeah, sorry to cut you off. Just that was my mistake. We'll have 3 minutes for people who are contributing in this part of the meeting. So if you can just be a bit mindful of time moving on, but I will pop in to let you know when you're needing to sum up. So we've got Mark Harrison from Reclaiming Our Futures Alliance and Norfolk DPAC next. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, I'm proud to have fought alongside Ellen and my DPAC colleagues against this assault on our lives, the war on disabled people. And I have to admit that I had to stop reading the book several times as it was re-traumatizing me. I had to reset my compass by remembering all the battles and direct actions we've carried out together over the last 10 years. And as CEO of Norfolk Coalition of Disabled People, which later became Equal Lives, I was part of one of those organisations, those DPOs, who are mentioned in the book. But I first and foremost saw myself as a member of the disabled people's rights movement, struggling for equality and human rights. And I'd seen firsthand, since the mid-90s really, of the degradation of the great social movement I was part of at the time, which was the British Council of Disabled People, where through lack of funding from successive Labour and Tory administrations, BCODP closed. And we attempt to revitalise it in UK DBC, which was not successful, but we now have a unified and powerful voice of DPOs in England in Reclaiming Our Futures Alliance. So that sense of solidarity lives on. I always saw a good DPO as one that supported disabled people to live independent lives and carried out a political struggle to remove the barriers in society. That's what we did at Equal Lives. And every attack over the last 10 years has been met with resistance. We oppose the scrapping of DLA and its replacement by PIP. And there's a good example of different organisations, because I was ashamed when the then Minister Against Disabled People, Maria Miller, announced at a meeting in Parliament that the only people that she was going to scrap DLA. And the only people that spoke out against it were myself at Norfolk Coalition and the Spinal Injuries Association. And representatives of Disability Rights UK tried, instead of speaking out, they tried to win business. They saw it as an opportunity by pleading for funding to carry out research. And all the disability charities that were in the room remained silent. And this sums up the last 10 years. The battle lines were drawn and DPAC emerged as the most powerful opposition to austerity. At a local level, we demonstrated against the bedroom tax, held monthly protests outside the inaccessible Atos, then Maximus assessment centres. And we also campaigned to scrap work capability assessments, and we picketed inaccessible PIP assessment centres. And we got those closed and changed. Nationally, DPAC, Norfolk and Equal Lives participated in DPAC's campaigns to save the ILF. We blocked traffic in central London, protested in the central lobby of Parliament, facing armed police as we tried to get into the House of Commons chamber. We blocked Whitehall outside Downing Street on several occasions, and we occupied the grounds of Westminster Abbey. And we were faced with a wall of hundreds of police threatening to arrest us all. We launched NAUC, the Norfolk Against Universal Credit, and the Scrap Universal Credit Alliance that Paula just talked about. And we want you to join us and set up groups in your area. And there's a guide on the website of SUCA to give you a guide of how to do it. The foundations of this book, Ellen wrote in the shadow report that she wrote to the UN Disability Committee. And that led to the UK government being accused of grave and systematic violations of our human rights and a human catastrophe. And that's why this book is so powerful. She brings in her historical materialist analysis, and she takes us back to the writings of Oliver and Finkelstein. And I think that's really important. But also she tells us that we have to understand the last 10 years in the wider capitalist relations that disability is bound up in. I agree with Ellen that the struggle to eradicate disability is not just a struggle against the Tories, as Labour and other political parties don't get it either. It's a struggle to transcend capitalism itself. That's why it's a powerful, powerful book. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you very much, Mark. So our next speaker was Rebecca Yeo. I don't know if you're here, ready to speak. Okay, so then we'll move to Mark Dunk. Oh. Okay. So Rebecca Yeo is a disabled activist and researcher at the University of Bath, looking at how to build stronger movement, including disabled citizens, asylum seekers, and allies. You have 3 minutes, Rebecca. Thank you. Ooh. We can hear you.
It's echoing, isn't it?
Not for us.
Okay, good. Okay, so as Ellen argues in her brilliant book, there is a war on disabled people. But there's also a war on asylum seekers, and there is a war on anybody who the neoliberal establishment frames as economically unproductive and therefore undeserving. We can't separate these battles. In the disabled people's movement, we know that if services and support are inaccessible, then services become disabling. The immigration system involves the deliberate denial of services and support. It is designed to be disabling. With everything else that's going on, we might think that these injustices are not our priority. But there are 3 main reasons why challenging the disabling nature of the immigration system must be among our priorities. Firstly, because people's lives are being reduced to a disabling struggle to meet basic human needs, including food, shelter, and healthcare. People with ongoing asylum claims get support of £5.66 per day, That's about 40% of universal credit, with no acknowledgement of costs associated with being disabled. Secondly, the UN Convention was never designed to apply to some disabled people under some circumstances. The restrictions in the immigration system matter because without active input from the disabled people's movement, decades of achievement are being undermined. Thirdly, these issues matter to us all because when we allow anyone to be treated as if their human needs were unimportant, then it's only a matter of time before similar policies are brought to more people. So Ellen describes the injustice of removing disability living allowance from citizens during welfare reform. Disabled people seeking asylum lost their right to this support in 1999, and it was not replaced with anything. Similarly, asylum seekers lost the right to choose where to live and became forced to move to areas of cheap accommodation, regardless of where friends and support might be. The impact is similar to the bedroom tax, but it happened a decade earlier. Maybe if we had all protested when rights were removed from asylum seekers, similar policies would never have been extended to citizens. So if for no other reason than self-preservation, we need to stop the disabling restrictions of the immigration system. Today, the war on disabled people has been taken to a new level. As Ellen says, we need the strongest possible movement of resistance and solidarity. So we need to bring together disabled citizens, migrants, and allies. We face practical barriers in that. And as Paula said, many people don't have access to the internet, and particularly a lot of asylum seekers don't have access to the internet. So organising through social media is great for some people, but inaccessible to others. But Ellen writes about how having members with diverse skills and abilities who face diverse barriers, it requires a collective effort, and that is refreshingly interdependent. The battles we're facing might seem too big. The injustices of the immigration system might seem impossible to change. But as Ellen writes, we have no choice. The stakes have become too high. An alternative is possible, and using Ellen's book will help us to create it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I just would like to read out one comment before I bring in Mark Dunk. And sorry, Rebecca, are you able to turn your camera off just to...
Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, so I have a comment here from Yuande Omoni, who describes himself as a disabled, she describes herself as a disabled young Black woman. And I think her words are as follows. I think one of the priorities for the next few years should be continuing to campaign for an inclusive education system. Education is the foundation for equality, and as long as disabled people are disadvantaged in education, I think it will be difficult to have full equality and empowerment. I also think that the movement needs to embrace disabled young people more. I often hear from older disabled people that young disabled people are not interested in campaigning for disability rights. I don't think that's the case at all. Most of the time, younger disabled people have not had the chance to be introduced to things such as disability history or the social model. I think if young disabled people are more involved in the movement, young and old disabled people can learn so much from them. Finally, as a Black disabled woman, I often experience discrimination on the basis of race as well as disability. I think disability campaigns should focus more on the fact that disabled people can experience discrimination in multiple areas and celebrate having more than one identity as disabled people. Thank you very much, Yolande, for that comment. And I'm sorry for the misgendering there. Mark Dunk is going to speak now for 3 minutes. Disabled trade union activist, trade unionist who sits on the London and Eastern Region Disabled Workers Committee of Unite the Union, but is speaking in a personal capacity and the first person to ever get arrested on a DPAC protest, Mark Dunk.
Oh, hi, thanks. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So just before I start, I wanted to thank Annie and John Kelly for the magnificent tributes to Sean. I mean, losing him's been a real blow on the London and Eastern Disabled Members Committee of Unite, where I sit, and it was good to be able to be with so many friends who've known Sean over the years and to celebrate the role he's played. I just want to start by saying to have recorded the history of the past decade of working class struggle against the Tory war on disabled people would be a worthwhile endeavour in itself. To do so in a book which also draws lessons from this period and starts to chart a course for the battles to come is a magnificent achievement. I want to congratulate and thank Ellen for this, and insist that anyone who hasn't got theirs yet should order a copy of the book at the earliest opportunity. It's been a long and at times exhausting war to fight, and it would be easy to fall into despair when the vicious and callous Johnson government and its utter contempt for our class signals the very real threat of even more brutal treatment for disabled people than that which has led the UN inquiry to call out grave and systematic violations of our rights. This is already on display in the removal of statutory duties to provide support services within the emergency coronavirus legislation, for example. But while things look bleak, it's important to remember despair won't help us in the fight to come. So what can we do? Not just to keep up the battle against further attacks, but to liberate disabled people from the barriers and oppression that we face. Ellen's right in the book to point out the limits of parliamentary approach to resolving the barriers we face, and to reassert the insistence of Barnes and Oliver that we must transform society. Even so, it was for a time with friends like John and Jeremy, who've stood with us in so many battles over the years at the head of the Labour Party, possible for us as disabled people to imagine realising some respite from the all-out brutality of the Tories through the ballot box. Sadly, this is no longer the case, and it's vital that we sharpen our focus on the sort of militant street campaigns that the book so brilliantly documents. If we look to the incredible progress made in just a few short weeks by the Black Lives Matter movement, we can see the same bold action and determination that's been so central to much of our own struggle is still something that has the power to galvanise resistance, shape the battle for ideas, and win real change. Our experience providing online platforms for people who can't join protests in person means we already operate in a way that can protect our activists most at risk from COVID-19 while the virus continues to be a threat. One of the most key insights in the book about the way forward, and one that's come up several times tonight already, and I believe should shape our campaigning going forward, is the continuing importance of building wider alliances and the role of universal credit and resisting it in this. The re-emergence of economic crisis has thrown millions of new people onto the mercy of a social security system decimated by 10 years of Tory cuts. Our attitude to those now experiencing the reality of life on universal credit can't be to sit back, sneer at people getting a taste of what we've had. It must be using our experience of building resistance against conditionality, testing and sanctioning to take up the opportunity of giving a lead to their inevitable discontent. Today, Johnson has reopened the shops. At some point, they'll reopen the job centres. And when they do, we should be ready to go there and rebuild an army to take them on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. Okay, Austin Harney, I have speaking next, a trade unionist with PCS Union and longtime DPAC member. Austin, you have about 3 minutes. We can hear you. Hello, Austin? Are you're on now, so you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Stephanie, if you can all hear me. And I want to say it's an honour and a privilege to be invited to speak on behalf of Ellen Clifford's book launch. I'd like to say hello to you, Ellen, and well done for all the great work you've done. I'll begin. When David Cameron came to power in 2010, PCS foresaw the dangerous austerity affecting disabled people. Therefore, under our General Secretary, yes? Hello? I'm being interrupted.
No, we can hear you. Please may anyone else who's on the call mute themselves just whilst people are speaking.
Hello? I've been interrupted. Hello, can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll just carry on because I just got interrupted a second ago. Sorry, I do apologise. Yeah, it was under our General Secretary, Mark Sawalker, our National President, Janice Godridge. Yeah, sorry, this is a bit of a delay here, so I've got 3 minutes. I do apologise. I'll start again. Is that okay?
Absolutely fine.
Yeah, all right.
Is there can you hear noise in the background? Austin.
Yeah, I've just been, sorry, I've just had some disruptions. Can I start again?
Yes, of course.
I do apologise. All right, sorry, but right. Thank you, Stephanie. And I'd just like to say it's an honour and privilege to speak on behalf of Ellen Clifford's book launch. And I'd like to say well done to Ellen for all the hard work she's done. I'll begin. When David Cameron became Prime Minister in 2010, PCS foresaw the dangerous austerity affecting disabled people. Therefore, under our General Secretary, Mark Sawalker, our National President, Janice Godridge, and Vice President, John McAnally, we formed a strong alliance with DPAC. Our purpose is to educate our membership, oppose legislative cuts to benefits to the disabled, and expose the Tory ideology of austerity. PCS is the trade union that has been on the forefront of attacks on social security. We put forward our programme on social security against this government on the poor, unemployed and the disabled, which is called the welfare alternative. Sadly, this government is still enforcing the worst anti-union laws for the DWP workers and PCS. The employer has a right to sequestrate the funds of any trade union that organises unofficial walkouts and sack its workers that refuse to comply with the harsh benefit sanctions on disabled people. Since 2010, successive Tory governments closed the Independent Living Fund and cut the Disability Living Allowance, as well as the Employment and Support Allowance. In actual fact, it was their first move to cowardly attack disability benefits. Also, the news media have demonised disabled claimants as benefit cheats, but the fraud rate is only 0.5% out of 2.9 million claimants. Yet, did it not stop the rise in disability hate crime? Yet, it did not stop the rise in disability hate crime. And what are these charities for disabled people doing about these iniquities? Today, all these different types of benefits have been merged into the universal credit, which is driving many disabled people to food banks and even suicide. Simultaneously, many job centres closed, which had a further impact on DWP workers and led to the 44-day strike of Eastern Avenue Job Centre in Sheffield. Sadly, charities are doing little to address the problem of only 47% of disabled people who are in employment. Yet this figure can be more startling when we apply it to other forms of disability. For instance, I am autistic who fought to save my own job in the civil service. But today, 84% of autistic people do not have full-time employment, and a further 9% are in part-time jobs. We ask this question again as some charities have disgracefully supported so-called damaging cures for autistic children, even resulting in deaths. These rogue forms of quackery include stem cell research, blood products, and even bleach treatments that Donald Trump wants to use for COVID-19 patients. If we want to fight for a better future for all disabled people, we cannot depend on charities that comply with the government's austerity policies. We need to broaden our campaign and hold every politician accountable who dare to undermine the protection of the disabled. I want to finally conclude by saying solidarity to Ellen Clifford and solidarity, sisters and brothers.
Thank you so much, Austin, and I'm sorry about the interference that we had there. So I would like to introduce Simone Aspis next. Yes, thank you. You've got 3 minutes.
Have you heard?
Yep, we can hear you.
Hi, my name is Simone Aspis, and I'm the Changing Perspectives Director and Free Our People Now campaign founder. First of all, I just want to say I'm absolutely delighted to be invited to Ellen Clifford's book launch, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. But as Ellen knows, I'm offering a challenge tonight. I have been asked to say what I think disabled people campaigning priorities should be now. During 2017, the UN Disability Committee scrutinised the UK government's implementation of the UNCRPD. They have now published their concluding evidence of grave and systematic violation of disabled people's human rights by the UK government. Over the past decade, government have not embarked on any state funding to promote disabled people's human rights under the UNCRPD. The COVID-19 Act removes many rights that disabled people fought so long for. Disabled people no longer have a right to community care, healthcare and education, and now the right to life. At the same time, the law made it easier and removes the safeguards so that disabled people can be compulsorily treated against their wishes in psychiatric institutions and assessment treatment units. On top of this, the government have told over 1.5 million people, disabled people, to shield themselves from the outside world, putting them under lock and key indefinitely. To ensure compliance, the NHS COVID-19 life-saving treatment policy banned certain groups of disabled people from state-funded life-saving treatment. This is part of the government's orchestrated eugenics programme, starting with Boris Johnson's idea of herd immunity. So what if a few million disabled people die from COVID-19 virus? What are disabled people's campaign priorities? First of all, full implementation of the UNCRPD, no ifs and no buts. Challenging the government's insidious eugenics programme. Third one, challenge increasing indefinite segregation, institutionalisation of disabled people in their own homes and within state-funded institutions. And finally, challenge the rubbish of insufficient funding. It's time we question where financial resources are being used, i.e. in policies that undermine our human rights. Of course, you're going to say, how can all this be funded? I have to say, austerity is no longer a dominant barrier that will address our oppression that we experience. After all, there are millions of pounds being spent on segregated education, locking people off institutions. I don't see any austerity there. Never saw it for a decade, and I don't see it right now. It is expected that this government would have spent £298 billion just for this financial year, April 2020 to 21, accordingly to the Office for Budget Responsibility. Now is the turning point, with all that cheap money sloshing around the money system, for the government to make the right choice by investing in a fully inclusive education system and independent living service, alongside having a tip-top NHS service that welcomes and treats all, regardless of impairment, health condition and age. I really cannot stress, but it is time now. We need to be seeing all this money is now being pumped into the economy. How much of it is really being used to promote our inclusion? And that is the way I think we need to be framing our campaigns, is not looking at the arguments that there's not enough money. There is more than enough money. This government is creating pounds by the day, and I understand there's a lot more of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Simone.
Congratulations, Ellen, and I'm sure Ellen will continue to have these conversations. And I think the second book of this series has to be how much money is being spent in services that are violating our human rights, and how little is being spent on actually promoting our human rights. So I welcome to a second book.
Thank you, Simone. Okay, so let me just, okay. We have Raymond Johnson, self-advocate from People First National Self-Advocacy and star of The Undateables.
Oh, yeah.
Raymond, you've got 3 minutes there, please.
Can any of you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Raymond.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much indeed. Just got to say about, really congratulate Ella for her book and stuff like that, the Sudabay. She gave us a little bit of the taste of the what she's written down and stuff like that. But what I want to say is through things that's been going on, over this past few months anyway. I mean, this year's going to be remembered for the virus and all that stuff. But we've been, suffering and all that sort of stuff out to sea. Because I got a land of, people land of cottage, have been, with this saying about this information that Boris Johnson's government is gave us. And information that he gave us and stuff like that is seen about, it's not all that, accessible. Even Einstein could tell you, what words were accessible and all that sort of stuff and that. It didn't even get any sort of pictures about what to do properly and all that sort of thing. Anyway, the other thing I want to say about is people were saying, quite rightly so, people were saying about the Black Lives Matter, and in light of what's going on up in the United States with the murder of George Floyd. And I've been watching the Panorama program that was on, and that was really shows what the police are doing, what they've been up to, why they done this sort of thing. Now, if that person has got a land difficulty, we could be asking, why they done that to the disabled person, and basically, it's just saying about, if Trump cares about anybody, frankly, I just got excuse I'm not sort of excuse me French if I can, because at the end of the day, it doesn't sort of care, at all. If I could be honest with you, the times that I've been hearing stuff from him about making to drink, disinfectant and all that sort of stuff and all that sort of crap and all the garbage that the United States and then the American sort of says, it's completely ridiculous.
Just to let you know, you've got to sum up now, Raymond, sorry.
Okay, so to sum up that now, we need to sort of do resistance against this government, and the one Trump is in president. I don't think Trump really understands people and how and all that sort of stuff, and we got to stand up a bit more for people in difficulties and stuff like that, and never ever give up the fight. We can blastly win this. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you very much, Raymond. And just on that note, I'm going to read a comment quickly from Miss Dennis Queen from Manchester DPAC, saying disabled activists should ask our disabled people's organisations, groups or networks to support local Black Lives Matter groups or related activism organisations. If you don't already have these links, now is the time to forge them. Ideas for how you can offer solidarity have been posted on the DPAC Facebook page. Please add to them if you have more ideas. The world is moving forwards and we need to join in with breaking down white supremacy, firstly by directly supporting urgent current activism, and then by locating and dismantling it within our organisations. Okay, thank you so much for that comment. I'd like to bring in Latoya Grant, a deaf activist who sits on the user-led Commission for Social Security project. Thank you, Latoya.
Hello, hi, I hope you can see me clearly.
Yeah, we can see you clearly and hear Sam.
Hi. Hello.
It's all good, we
That
can
was
hear.
good?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, brilliant. It's good to know you can see me clearly. Fantastic, good. Okay, so, okay. So I want to talk about universal credit. So yes, I want to talk about universal credit because this really does disproportionately affect deaf people in a very negative way. And I'm very concerned about the barriers. Applying is not easy. The English that the application form is written in is very, very high English, and it's very difficult for a BSL user to be able to access that. And unfortunately, it's not good for for BSL users. The jargon that's used in the process is very difficult to understand. The user journey of the person applying, the deaf person applying for universal credit, and it can lead to a situation where people are really struggling for money. People are unable to buy food, unable to buy things that they need to care for themselves adequately. And we need to make the DWP aware of this, that this is an access barrier and that needs to change. And then people will be able to access the benefits that they are rightly able to. There's a lot of communication breakdown. The communication isn't clear to understand for BSL users. And unfortunately, we have a Tory government and the we need to be able to break down those barriers so that we can feel so that we can engage properly with the people that are disproportionately affected by this. We need to make sure that we have an open access to the DWP. And because of the coronavirus, we haven't had any support. We've had no interpreters at government briefings, and I apologise that the video is very jumpy on my end, so the voiceover is not as accurate as it should be. So we have had a problem with accessing information linked to the coronavirus. So deaf people are not able to get that information. So it is a really big issue. We need independent for deaf people, because this is our right. BSL is our first language, and we need to have that respected. And also, social media has been an absolute godsend. It's actually saved people's lives. It's kept people in contact with each other. It's empowered people. And through social media, we've been able to learn about information that we just have not had access to in the wider discussion. And that is a really important thing for bridging and overcoming the gap in information, because without that, we can lead to more isolation for deaf people. And I would really love to say more, but I think that's my time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Latoya. Thank you. And thank you to Sam as well. Okay. Our next speaker is Andy Green, DPAC National Sorry. All good. Is everything good, Latoya? Okay. Okay, sorry. Andy Green, we've got coming up next. He's from DPAC National Steering Group. Let me see. Andy's here. Yes, you are. Okay, you've got 3 minutes, Andy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm just going to start off by taking a minute just to kind of, and I know that Ellen probably won't thank me for this, but we have heard a lot about kind of Ellen the activist, Ellen the writer, Ellen the PA, lots of things to lots of people. But as a person, I think we can often forget the kind of people who are most effective in this kind of work. And it's usually the people that feel it the most deeply and who are moved to act the most strongly. And I think that is absolutely true about Ellen. I think that as a person, she feels this movement and the people who make it up and the demands of this movement and the people's lives who make it up really, really strongly on a day-to-day basis. And everything she does is about, progressing those demands. And I think there is no higher compliment than to say that the disabled people of the UK can have no better person than Ellen doing the work out there to progress those demands. I think, secondly, going forward, I think, look, it's not about reinventing the wheel. I think, number one, recognizing and acknowledging the fantastic work that actually getting out there on the streets has done and the impact that it's had on people's lives and people seeing themselves reflected in those actions and really kind of having a stake. And as Mark said earlier, connecting with that, whether or not they can be in that physical space and supporting people who are there. I think ensuring we continue with that. I think building things, I think, how great or how small, doesn't matter. Walking groups, phone trees, internet quizzes, building things where people come together and start sharing and growing those things and connecting with other people. And that's the very basic of how we start to rebuild following this period of lockdown. I think valuing people's contributions, understanding that your part in this movement can be whatever you do, whether it is art and whether it's writing or whether it is, in your local trade union or your local community group, that actually bringing the politics into those spaces and having those conversations is really, really important as well. But I think the most critical thing we can do now, because there's nothing like a good vision. And I think building a vision and getting people involved in looking forward in kind of imagining the world that they want to live in and then moving towards it together. And I think that's a really big undertaking to get people to see themselves differently, to see the world differently, and to see their relationship differently between those two things. So if we can do that, I think if we can prioritize that, doing the good stuff that we have been doing, valuing people where they're at, and building a vision which is all part of everybody's aspirations and what people want to do with their lives, then we will have a fantastic next 10 years to look at. And at the end of that period, I think there will be Ellens all over this country if we are lucky. And I think there will be leaders and people who are able to balance being out on the street, having the confidence to talk about these issues in a really meaningful way, but also connecting them to those big ideas. And I can't remember who said it earlier, but someone was saying about bringing in young people. And I think making our messaging really relevant to their lived experience and their daily lives is really, really important. And I don't think that begins with talking. I think a lot of the time that begins with listening to where people are at. And I think it's really important to kind of put our arm out and say, you know, you're welcome here. There is stuff to be gotten on with. There is a role and a place for you. And what you have to offer and contribute to this movement is as important as much you can take away from it. And I think those would be the same priorities that we have had for a number of years. But I think learning now that these opportunities that have emerged, like the opening up of the digital world, like the interconnectivity and the expansion of the connections between people, these give us great opportunities now going forward. And what we should do is bring all those stuff, all these great activities and events that have been going on, bring them to the surface, connect them to each other, offer some sort of support, and get the good work and the positive activity that is being done within our community out to the world, and use that as a platform to have a bigger, wider conversation about what we want the society to look like.
Thank you so much, Andy. Next, we will hear from John Clark, formerly organiser of Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, now PACA visitor in social justice at York University in Toronto, Canada. So John, you have 3 minutes. Say something.
Not hearing anything.
Oh, we can hear you.
Not hearing any sound.
We can hear you saying not hearing any sound.
Not hearing anything. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Can. Well, if you can hear me, I'm just going to go ahead and speak, even though I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, then. So I wanted to, first of all, bring greetings from the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty in Toronto. And I wanted to thank Ellen for this incredible book. And I wanted to suggest that there are 3 real ways in which this book takes us forward for the struggles that lie ahead. First of all, it provides a very clear understanding of the basis on which in this capitalist society that disabled people have been and are being oppressed and excluded. And it shows how in the context of post-2010 hyper austerity in Britain, that has been so inhumanly intensified, and how dreadful that has been. But what it also shows, secondly, is a real model of resistance. Ellen talked in terms of not being passive victims. When I've gone back over to the UK and visited with DPAC, I've been struck by the fact that an organisation of disabled people has emerged that doesn't only play a role in the fight against austerity, but actually plays a leading role and shapes that struggle in ways that are really enormously important. But the third point that I really wanted to make about why this book is so important is because it was, before the events of the last few months, shaping up as an important model, a vital model of how to build a movement and of resistance. But things have changed so fundamentally and so dramatically, not just because of the pandemic, but because of the whole economic crisis that is unleashed. So we're now dealing with a situation where we're going to come out of this lockdown, perhaps sooner than we should, and we're going to be confronting a situation of incredible austerity, of mass unemployment, of thousands and thousands of people living on the edge of being evicted from their housing. And in that situation, those who have established a record of how to organize and how to fight back are going to be playing an incredibly important and decisive role. And I think that that's really where we go now. We never imagined that we would live in the kind of times that we have. Things can change so incredibly. Who would have imagined? I'm sure the cop that murdered George Floyd didn't imagine what he was going to unleash, but it has had implications. A struggle has sprung up. People are just not going to take it. And that's what we're really seeing. And in that situation, we're seeing people do things they never thought they would do, and we're seeing things that people never thought would happen. Who would imagine that Edward Colston's statue would end up on the bottom of the harbour in Bristol? Who would have thought that so many people would take to the streets to challenge police brutality and racism in the way that they've done in the present situation? So I think this is a remarkably changed situation. I think this book and this incredible woman and this incredible organisation that she represents have given us something really precious for the fight that lies ahead. Thank you so much, and solidarity, because we're going to need it.
It's incredibly, incredibly powerful words. Thank you very much for that, John. We are at the end of our evening here. I'm just going to go through a few comments that have come in. We don't have time to say all of them, but Ellen will respond to those that are asking her questions. I just wanted to add that we had a contribution from Antonio Sorellas from Zero Tolerance in Greece. Congratulations on the publication of the significantly important book. We are expecting with great excitement to have it here in Greece. During the pandemic, under these unprecedented conditions, disabled people were again marginalized, the largest social group experiencing racism and discrimination long before COVID-19 was found without substantial protection. The issues of oppression and social marginalization experienced by the disabled in the context of capitalist society have led to greater discrimination on the occasion of the pandemic. The government's measures to tackle COVID-19 ignored us and we were left aside. Disabled people had no choice but to take action ourselves. We created a nationwide network of solidarity under the name No Disabled Person Alone, supplying basic items, medicines, etc. We had a great response and needs were largely met. That's all we can hope for. Okay, so we do have just an announcement, but first I would like to explain that the recording of tonight and a transcript, as well as a visual record made by the brilliant seen and heard illustrator David Ziggy Green, will be made available after this. Comments and contributions, again, will be fed back to Ellen. So I would like to announce, oh, sorry, we still have another speaker. I'm so sorry. So sorry, Roger. Okay. Roger Lewis, if you are ready to speak, I will give you 3 minutes now, just before the end. Okay.
Okay, I think I'm here. Thanks, Stephanie. And I'd just like to, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Can you hear me? Yeah, lovely. I'd just like to start by first thanking you, Stephanie, for chairing this event so brilliantly. And also to Ellen Morrison, working very hard in the background there to keep things moving. I'm not on video, being visually impaired. I'm using my phone and it'll be waving all over the place. So my apologies for not having the video on. I'd just like to start with a quote. It was a quote from a Marxist ex-president of Chile, Salvador Allende, who once said, "History is ours, for it is made by the people," and how right he was at a time, as John has just mentioned, while across Britain we're seeing statues being torn down in Bristol, the East End of London, and a reinvigorated campaign to get rid of Cecil Rhodes' statue in Oxford. These, of course, represents their history, the history of our ruling class, and what an infamous history it is of slavery, of colonialism, of injustice and oppression. We have to write our own history and we have to make our own history. And Ellen's book is part of that history. And it's necessary and important that we have that record. It's Professor Barnes recollected us to the struggle back in the 1970s and 80s with organisations like UPIUS and DAN Direct Action Network. This was at a time, of course, while we were seeing explosions of radical movements across the world. France, 1968, the students, and of course the Black Civil Rights movements in America, the anti-Vietnam War movement, women's movement, the emergence of what was then the lesbian and gay movement, now the LGBT plus movement. And the disability movement came in on the heels of that. As Ellen says in a book, with the rolling quads in America, but here, as Professor Barnes was talking about with UPIUS and Dan, at that time we were moving forward. We were winning new rights, new ways of seeing our equality being moved forward. Since 2010, though, and the financial crash from 2008, we've been on the back foot, and the history that Ellen details so thoroughly in her book is a history of our resistance against a Tory government that's been determined to push all the advances that we won back in those days back again. The strength of DPAC, again, Ellen made this absolutely correctly clear in her questions and answers contribution. If you can summarise DPAC in one word, it's solidarity. We recognised that our fight was the fight that was not just about us, but other groups were going to be targeted as well. It was clear that the Tories thought that disabled people would be a nice easy pushover. How wrong they were, as John McDonnell quite rightly said. We set the standard. We put the flag in the sand to show how to fight back against this government and how to form resistance and solidarity with others. So we found ourselves in support with the Bakers Union up in Wigan fighting against 0 hours contracts. We found ourselves forging links, as Austin talked about, with members in the PCS, the very job centres where our people were being sanctioned, where we recognised that 40% of job centre workers were on benefits. We forged those links. We're in, of course, with our colleagues in the RMT with the campaign to keep guards on trains. Solidarity has been at the core of what we do. And that's also been in the fight against the far right and against racism. We've been long campaigning supporters of Stand Up to Racism and the fight against the rise to the Far Against League. And more recently, the Democratic Football Lads Alliance. We need to do that even more now with the Black Lives Movement. And we were strong supporters of the justice movement for Sean Rigg and for Christopher Orr, the 2 young black men who were killed at the hands of the police, who also experienced mental distress, 2 disabled men who were killed by the police because of the colour of their skin. So we stand in solidarity with the family of George Floyd and all of those in Minneapolis, and all of those in taking part in the uprisings right across America and here in Britain with the Black Lives Movement. And we'd urge everybody this coming Wednesday at 6 p.m. to take a knee in support of the Black Lives Movement here and join in our struggles together. For those who can't kneel, show your solidarity in a way which is accessible to you. Just put them up on your window, raise your fist. So let's join together in those struggles, but then get back to fighting for ourselves as well, because we need to take this fight on in the fight against welfare reform, the fight against universal credit. We need to stop and scrap. And we've got a job to do once the lockdown is over and we start getting back to business. So we need to forge those links with everybody that we work with out there. Ellen's book is hugely important in helping organise that struggle. And so I'm urging everybody to buy Ellen's book, to read Ellen's book, to get involved, to get active and get in touch with the fight back. Solidarity.
Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you. I realised that you were meant to speak after I did this bit as well, so sorry. But the next meeting for DPAC is a stop and scrap for universal credit. Where now for the campaign? And this will be on Monday, the 22nd of June on Zoom. And you can email if you would like to take part at mail@dpac.uk.net. Speakers will include Mark Harrison from the Reclaiming Our Futures Alliance, campaigner Gail Ward, blogger Charlotte Hughes, researcher Jay Mehta, and National President of PCS Union, Fran Heathcote. That will be followed by meetings on universal basic income on Monday the 29th of June, and on reclaiming the social model of disability on Monday the 6th of July. There are more things to come. Basically, just follow DPAC. I would like to give a huge, huge thanks to all of the speakers, but also to the organisers, especially Ellen Morrison, James Smith and Catherine Dale for their technical support, to the interpreters, Nikki, Sam and Becky, and to Norma and Julia for the live captioning of "We wouldn't be able to do this without you, so thank you very much." And to John as well for his incredible music in the break. To Andy Mitchell for help with social media, and to David Ziggy Green for the visual record. This is when I hand over to Roger Lewis. But yeah, Roger, if you'd like to come in to say 2 more words, or we could end there if you'd like.
Okay, no, thank you, Stephanie. And yeah, what a fantastic evening and what a fantastic event it's been. So good to hear from everybody and all of those who fought together along with us over the last 10 years. And there's an opportunity now for us to reflect on that, but also to reorganize and work out where we go next. We will be planning events as soon as lockdown is over. The kind of events, you know, we'll be do is the usual stuff from DPAC. So back to business. We can't wait to get our teeth stuck in again. And as John was saying earlier, you know, with this movement and this explosion of anger around the world now, that should give us hope that we can turn things back. We can turn things around. This government which has got to go, and we've got to be right at the forefront of making that happen, linking our struggles together. So solidarity again, everybody, and thanks for such a fantastic and wonderful evening. And most of all, a big thank you to my very best friend, Ellen Clifford. And yeah, just fantastic. Message is still coming in saying how wonderful this has been. So thank you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And please buy Ellen's book from zbooks.net.